It is my pleasure to welcome you to the first episode of the Visible Man podcast. My goal is to inform, elevate, and inspire you to embrace being visible in a world that wants you to be invisible. Today's episode, I will talk about 3 areas of Black life: visible people becoming invisible to becoming visible again. That's 1, visible people; 2, becoming invisible; 3, to becoming visible again. At the end of each podcast, I will mention one person I believe is making him or herself visible. A few years ago, I had what is known as an epiphany. No, that is not a medical procedure of some sort. However, almost everyone will at some point in their lifetime have one of these. Epiphany. I was taking inventory of my books. I say about 200 books. Suddenly, it dawned on me that a large percentage of my books were by white authors. The amount of books I had by black authors were less than 10. I really hadn't paid attention before because I just enjoyed reading books. And if a book became interesting to me, I would buy it and read it. But at the moment of discovery, my mind began to go through a paradigm shift. And I began getting rid of all the books by white authors with the idea of replacing them with black authors. Which brings me to something I put on Facebook after that moment of epiphany. I wrote the following, and I called it "The Invisible Man Becoming Visible." If my mind is filled with white thought and less black thought, I stand the chance of becoming more invisible than I already am. My invisibility is not a threat to those who deem me acceptable. The moment my mind becomes free and I stand up against systemic injustices is the moment I'm no longer invisible. Now the world has to deal with my visibility. I have since then edited that thought to this: if my mind is filled with white thought and less of black thought, I stand the chance of becoming more invisible than I already am. My invisibility is not a threat to those who deem me acceptable, because to them I am one of those good Negroes. And good Negroes never take side against them no matter what. The moment my mind becomes free and I take a stand by no longer accepting their ideas of freedom for me is the moment I'm no longer invisible. Now the world has to deal with my visibility. Let's talk about it. It all started in Africa. For thousands of years, on the largest continent in the world, lived a people. They had their own system of governance, culture, art, math, and scholarly writings. However, that is not what made Africa the most famous. Although throughout Europe are museums with untold amounts of African artifacts that have made the museums famous, Africa, being the largest continent, embodied what it means to be an endless place of resources, human, animal, and natural resources, such as gold, silver, iron, copper, and diamonds. Then there are the pyramids in Africa. Although there are white people for centuries that have been trying to separate Egypt from Africa, mainly because the Egyptian tombs reveals the brilliance of a black race. That is a subject for a later podcast. As we travel through this podcast, ponder this question: what do you and I know about the people of Africa that were brought to America, lived before arriving here? If we rely on all the movies that have portrayed Africa as a place where people are barbarians, that would be the extent of what many of us know about Africa. Now, if you're one of those who were privileged to attend college and have taken African American study courses, you, my friend, make up a small segment of the population that have been taught things about Africa that were never discussed in school. The visible people I speak of here is on the level of a people that existed who controlled their own destiny. They had their own system of governance, as I said, laws, education, art, math, and scholarly works. They had their own language, and they had their own religion. And it was within their power to determine their own destiny. They did not have people from other nations dictating their every movement. However, the moment people from nations across the sea began to land in Africa is the moment a bleak future for the continent began to take form. Eventually, the ultimate betrayal occurred, and many Africans were captured, kidnapped, and transported across thousands of miles of sea and brought here to North America. The now caught visible people will begin a tumultuous and long journey on American soil that would reduce them to being an invisible people. And since the Africans were strong people and a people with a long and rich tradition, those who owned Africans as slaves made sure that the Africans would be forbidden to do three things: live as a free people like they did in Africa, speak their native language, and practice their native religion. All three are equally important because all three are interconnected as to retaining a tradition that says who they are as a people. Removing these three would begin the end to maintaining their African traditions. So, you are taken, forced to speak a new language, forbidden to speak your native language, and your religion is also taken away, and you're eventually given a new one. You become invisible. Your and my ancestors became an invisible people. Those that created the American slave system were strategic and how they would exercise control over the black race. And that system of total dominance worked and created the master-slave society. Let me say this. Your ancestors were not slaves. And the reason I say that is when we think of the history of slavery, we say, well, they're slaves. Remove where they came from. Then you also remove their connection from the country of origin. They were men, women, and children who had been reduced to property. They were human beings that a society said were not human beings. Their creator did not create the situation of the American slave institution, no matter what anyone says otherwise. So it is important that we remember that the ancestors that arrived here on American soil who became slaves, they were a people. The enslaved Africans were reminded day by day by those that now owned them that they, the Africans, were not human, that they were a low form of animal, and that they, the owners, were justified in doing what they were to them as legally owning them. To further the idea of creating an invisible people, white preachers would say that the black Africans were cursed with dark skin, that God cursed Ham, and it was God who had assigned the black race to slavery, and they were to be there in perpetual, forever. The decisions that were made by those who owned other human beings kept pushing black people further into invisibility, separating families. A husband and wife would have children, and the child would be sold off to another master. So the idea of family for black people would always be something at that time that no one was sure of. Working sun up to sundown, the master having his way with black women, even to the degradation of what they did to black men. The merciless beatings with whip, and it goes on at every turn, debilitating the black body, mind, and soul. Then there are also the lynchings. And take for instance, if you are a 60-year-old man at that time, you would be addressed by a 20-year-old white male as boy. I can't stop there. Free labor, as well as our ancestors, were not allowed to read. It was against the law for a black person to read a book. When addressed by a white man or white woman, you could not look them in the eye or in the face. Black people, let's be reasonable here. Exactly what do you think all of this does to a person? How are the children of the invisible people supposed to function with so many onion-like layers that has covered the soul, as well as living among those who had determined that these black people are invisible, insignificant, and only good for creating wealth for them? We know that the idea of ending slavery would become a national conversation. We also know that those that profited from years of free labor are not willing to give up owning human as property. A civil war between the North and South became a reality. But before the war, Southern states began talks on becoming their own nation. To lead the charge, South Carolina declared that they would no longer be affiliated with the Union, and some other states joined in. With the war, the South undoubtedly lost, which created a new day and a new future for every black person who was enslaved. So black people were thrust into a long-awaited life of freedom. It was that freedom that began the people's quest for becoming a visible people again. But though they were free, they would eventually find themselves having to deal with white people who days earlier had owned them and now seeing them as free people. The Southern whites resented seeing black people as free people. And that resentment resulted in black people being attacked, beaten, murdered, lynched, accused of crimes they did not do. The resentment of the Southern states created laws that restricted black people from moving throughout the South. Then there were the sunset towns and the KKK intimidation and on and on. But in the face of a new level of racial hate by Southern whites, and of course, some northern states also, black people refused to return to the days of invisibility. Ending slavery was the front door for the black race, which led to a level of visibility where finally black men could say, I am a man, and black men could say to the world, I am a free man. Fast forward. (2021). Visible people. Black people have spent decades endeavoring to convince those in American government to get rid of every law, policy at state and national level as regards to equal treatment, which the Constitution guarantees. Strident changes have been made over the years. However, there have been a degree of holdout, people who have helped sustain the white supremacy ideology and its structure, because they would have some to believe that somehow black people being on the same playing field is not fair to white people. And some are saying black people are already being treated equally. Really? Well, it's time we as black people say what equality looks like. And it's time to elevate our visibility. Being visible is the idea of controlling your own destiny as a people. Being visible is not about saying, hey, look at me, but instead it is more about you as a black person and we as a race. We should and we must understand the brevity of what is at stake and begin to strategize on how we will get to that place where we control our own destiny. And we must stop looking to those who do not look like us for solution. Look around you. Where have their solutions brought us? The solutions are in us. So what can we do? Two things. It all starts with realigning our thinking. And the only way that will happen is reading books by black authors that elevate your mind as being black and living in America. Next, solidarity. No matter your religious affiliation or your political affiliation, we as a race have to come together. We've got to stop with the schisms that have been used to keep us fighting one another, or ideas that keeps us not wanting to trust one another. Black people, we either succeed together or we fail together. I prefer we succeed. Of course, some of the problems we face are self-inflicted, and others are created by outside forces to keep us in a state of confusion. There are countries that have different political ideologies, yet when one enemy becomes an enemy to them all, they will come together for the main purpose of collectively defeating that one enemy. We as a race of people must understand that there is a common enemy that has successfully launched policies, laws, regulations, and all-out wars on black flesh. Let us not kid ourselves about the state of black life. We were a visible people that became invisible. We are visible again. Being visible is the idea of controlling your own destiny as a people. I want to take a moment to recognize a black person who I think is using his visibility and sparking change in the lives of other blacks. King Randall a 21-year-old black man in Georgia is bringing phenomenal changes to the lives of black boys. He started a nonprofit organization called X for Boys in 2019. He has since then started a New Life preparatory school for young boys in which he hoped will provide Albany boys more opportunity for success. I salute and congratulate this young man for the great work he is doing and for not allowing this world to determine his destiny. This man is not invisible. I encourage each of you to visit his Facebook page and check out what he is doing in the lives of black male youth. It is no secret that black boys are constantly under bombardment that is too much for them to handle. However, we also know that when people like King Randall steps in with a plan on saving black boys, those boys become powerful in their own right in navigating a world that is not friendly to them. Thank you, King Randall, for what you are doing. I hope that your work becomes a model for others who want to save black boys as well. My prayer is that you will continue to get wisdom and the resources to accomplish what you have set out to do. Thank you for listening, and do join me again for another episode of the Visible Man Podcast. Also tell others who look like you about the podcast. Until next time, be informed, be elevated, be inspired. I'm Kelechi J. Benet. Stay visible.